My name is Lydia Monroe. I'm 29 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I genuinely believed I was building something real with someone, not in a dramatic, soulmate destiny way, just real in the quiet, adult sense, shared routines, weekend plans, the unspoken assumption that you were both walking in the same direction. His name was Marcus. We'd been together for 8 months, long enough that I'd stopped questioning where I stood, short enough that I clearly hadn't seen the full picture yet. I'm a commercial architect. I spend my days solving problems that don't announce themselves loudly: load limits, circulation flow, structural compromises hidden behind clean lines. I'm good at noticing stress fractures before they become collapses, which makes it almost embarrassing how long it took me to notice the ones in my own relationship. We met at a mutual friend's housewarming party in early spring. He had an easy confidence, the kind that feels warm at first. He asked smart questions, listened just long enough to make you feel interesting. When he smiled at me, it felt intentional. Within weeks, we were inseparable on weekends. Marcus worked in pharmaceutical sales, conferences, travel, stories about hotels that all blurred together. He talked a lot about his family, how close they were, how often they gathered. I liked that. Mine was scattered, functional, but distant. I'd always admired people who belonged somewhere so effortlessly. The first cracks were small. A comment here, a joke there. "Lydia's brilliant," he'd say to friends, then add with a laugh. "But don't ask her to loosen a screw. She'll hire someone." People laughed. I smiled. It was harmless. I told myself that. Another time, "She's not really a sports person. More blueprints and spreadsheets." Again, laughter. Again, me smiling just a second too late. What bothered me wasn't the words. It was the look in his eyes when people reacted, the satisfaction, like he'd scored a point. By midsummer, it escalated. He'd forget to introduce me at gatherings, stand beside me, arm around my waist, while I hovered unnamed at the edge of conversations. When I mentioned it later, quietly, he laughed. "You're overthinking. You're so sensitive sometimes." I stopped bringing it up. I worked later, spent more time at the gym, told myself relationships required flexibility, that I just needed thicker skin. His birthday dinner came in late November. An upscale Italian place downtown. Exposed brick, soft lighting. The kind of restaurant that made you feel slightly underdressed, no matter what you wore. He planned it obsessively. Guest list updates, outfit debates, seating arrangements. He asked me to come early to help greet people. I arrived at 6:30 in a charcoal dress I'd had tailored that week, holding a gift I'd spent far too long choosing, a vintage compass he'd admired months earlier. Something symbolic, something thoughtful. "You look nice," he said when I walked in, barely glancing at me. His attention was already elsewhere. About 20 people filled the long table, friends, family. I recognized a few faces. Most were strangers. Marcus moved through the room like he was on stage, laughing loudly, touching shoulders, collecting attention. I stood near the bar, nursing a drink, making polite conversation with his cousin about real estate trends and interest rates. Around 7:30, he clinked his glass. The room quieted immediately. Everyone turned toward him, smiling. He gestured toward me. "This is Lydia," he said brightly. "My girlfriend." Smiles, a few nods, someone raised a glass. Then he added with that same effortless grin, "Don't be under any misunderstanding, just temporary." For half a second, the room was silent. Then it exploded. Real laughter, loud, unrestrained. Someone slapped the table. His sister nearly choked on her drink. A voice from the back shouted his name in mock outrage, which only made it worse. I stood there, heat flooding my face, then draining away completely. Marcus wasn't looking at me anymore. He was soaking it in. The applause, the validation. I set my glass down. My hands were steady. I walked to the counter, paid for my portion, and left. Behind me, the laughter faded into conversation. Outside, the cold air hit my face like a reset. And for the first time in 8 months, I felt something clear cut through the noise. Not anger, not heartbreak. Clarity. The door closed behind me with a muted thud, sealing the warmth and noise inside. The November air was sharp, immediate. It stripped everything down to sensation. Cold on my cheeks, the sound of traffic, my breath turning visible under the streetlights. I stood there for a second longer than necessary, like my body needed proof that I was really outside, that I'd actually left. Inside that restaurant, Marcus was probably laughing again. Someone would have already called for another round of wine. Life would have snapped back into place without me in it. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I didn't look. It buzzed again, and again. I walked 3 blocks to where I'd parked, heels clicking against the sidewalk in a rhythm that felt too loud for how quiet I suddenly felt inside. When I reached my car, I sat behind the wheel without starting the engine, hands resting loosely in my lap. The phone kept vibrating. Through the windshield, I could see the restaurant in the distance. Soft golden light, spilling out onto the street, silhouettes moving behind the windows. A couple walked past my car, laughing, their shoulders pressed together. The sound drifted through the glass, distorted but unmistakably intimate. I felt strangely detached, like I'd stepped out of my own life and was watching it continue without me. I started the engine and drove home. By the time I unlocked my apartment door, my phone showed 17 missed calls and more texts than I cared to count. Most from Marcus, a few from numbers I recognized as his friends, one from his cousin. "Are you okay?" I didn't open any of them. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter, poured myself a glass of whiskey, the good bottle I'd been saving for something that felt earned, and sat on the couch with the lights off. The screen lit up again, and again. Each vibration was like a small insistence that I explain myself, that I justify leaving a room where I'd been reduced to a punchline. Curiosity eventually won. I picked up the phone. "Lydia, where did you go? Are you seriously leaving right now? Call me." A few minutes later, the tone shifted. "It was a joke. You're being ridiculous. Everyone thinks you overreacted." Then the one that made my chest tighten. "You embarrassed me in front of my whole family." I read it twice. I embarrassed him. I set the phone down carefully, like it might shatter if I wasn't gentle, and turned it off completely. The sudden silence felt heavy, but clean. That night I didn't cry. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The laugh, the way he hadn't even glanced at me afterward, the certainty in his voice when he'd said temporary, like it was a fact he'd been waiting to reveal. Sunday passed in a blur of deliberate distraction. I went for a long run through the park, the kind where your lungs burn and your thoughts finally lose their grip. I cleaned my apartment with a focus that bordered on obsessive, scrubbing baseboards, reorganizing closets I hadn't touched in months. It felt like reclaiming territory. That evening, I ordered Thai food, put on a documentary I only half watched, and tried not to think about the fact that my phone was still off. Around 8, I turned it back on. There was one voicemail from Marcus. His voice was tight, clipped, controlled anger, barely contained. "I don't know what your problem is," he said, "but you made me look like an idiot on my birthday. People kept asking where you went. I had to make excuses for you. Call me back so we can talk about this like adults." I deleted it without hesitation. Then I blocked his number. When I went to bed that night, something inside me finally settled. Not peace, not yet, but resolve. Monday morning arrived without ceremony. No dramatic hangover, no wave of regret, just the sound of my alarm, the gray light filtering through the blinds, and the faint awareness that something fundamental had shifted while I slept. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, taking inventory of myself. My chest felt tight, but not in the panicked way I'd expected. It was more like the ache after you'd been holding something heavy for too long and finally set it down. I got up, made coffee, and dressed for work with mechanical precision. Navy blazer, black slacks, hair pulled back into a low bun, the version of myself that knew how to function even when things were unraveling. The drive downtown felt surreal. Traffic lights changed. People crossed streets. The city carried on, unaware that my personal timeline had cracked in two. My office sat in an older building with high ceilings and drafty windows that never quite sealed properly in the winter. I liked it for that reason. It wasn't trying to be perfect. It had history, texture, character. I buried myself in work. A mixed-use development proposal was due by Wednesday, and the facade still felt wrong. I redlined drawings, adjusted load calculations, reworked circulation paths. The focus was a relief. Plans didn't care about your feelings. They either worked or they didn't. Around 11, my desk phone rang. Internal line. "Lydia," Patricia said, her voice hesitant. "There's someone here to see you." "I don't have any meetings scheduled." "He says it's personal." I closed my eyes. "And he's not alone." My jaw tightened. "Who is it?" "Marcus, and there's an older man with him. I think it's his uncle." Of course it was. "Tell them I'm unavailable." "I tried," Patricia said quietly. "He's insisting, and he's starting to raise his voice." I exhaled slowly, counting to 3. "I'll be right out." The lobby was bright in a way that felt almost confrontational. Polished marble floors, glass walls reflecting everything back at you, whether you wanted to see it or not. Marcus stood near the elevators, arms crossed, jaw tight. He looked like he hadn't slept. His hair was pulled back messily, the confident polish from Saturday night gone. Beside him stood a man in his 50s with a thick build, graying hair, and an expensive watch that caught the light every time he moved. His uncle. I'd met him once at a summer barbecue. He talked at length about lumber prices and labor shortages. "Lydia," Marcus said as soon as he saw me. His voice softened, shifting gears. "We need to talk." "No, we don't," I replied evenly. "You made your position clear on Saturday. I'm respecting that." His uncle stepped forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Look, maybe we can all sit down somewhere." "I'm not your daughter," I interrupted calmly. "And no, we can't." Marcus's face flushed. "You're being childish." "I'm being professional," I said. "You showed up unannounced at my workplace." "It was a joke," he snapped. "Everyone laughed. You're the only one who didn't get it." "I got it," I said. "That's why I left." "Oh my God," he scoffed. "You're so sensitive." I met his eyes. "Yeah, I've heard that." There was a pause, the kind that pulls attention like a magnet. "What you did," I continued, my voice steady, "was tell a room full of people that I didn't matter to you, that I was disposable, temporary." "That's not what I meant." "It doesn't matter what you meant. It matters what you said." His uncle frowned, looking between us. "Marcus," he said slowly, "what exactly did you say?" Marcus hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "I introduced her," he said, "and said it was temporary. It was sarcasm." "It didn't sound like sarcasm," I said. "It sounded like the truth." "That's because you're paranoid," Marcus shot back. "You've always been paranoid about what people think." "Maybe," I said quietly, "because you spent 8 months giving me reasons to be." Patricia was pretending very hard to be busy behind the desk. A coworker slowed near the entrance, checking his phone a little too deliberately. His uncle cleared his throat. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here." "There hasn't," I said. "I'm at work. You both need to leave." Marcus's eyes were glassy now, anger and something else flickering beneath it. "You're really throwing away 8 months over this?" "You threw it away on Saturday," I said. "I just refused to stay and applaud." The words seemed to land harder than I'd intended. He opened his mouth, closed it, then lashed out. "You're boring," he said. "Small. You have no sense of humor." I was settling. For a moment, the world narrowed to that sentence. And then nothing. No sharp pain, no urge to defend myself. Just exhaustion. "Then it's a good thing you don't have to anymore," I said. I turned and walked back toward my office. Behind me, I heard his uncle murmur something low and urgent. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I didn't look back. I didn't make it 10 steps back into my office before my hands started shaking. Not visibly. Not enough that anyone passing would notice. Just enough that I had to sit down and press my palms flat against the desk, grounding myself in the solid edge of it. The glass wall reflected my face back at me. Composed, neutral, professional. If I hadn't been inside my own body, I might have believed it. I stared at my screen for a full minute before the numbers and lines stopped blurring together. Then I went back to work. Not because I felt strong, but because stopping felt like letting him take one more thing. A few minutes later, my desk phone rang again. "Lydia?" Patricia's voice was softer this time. Careful. "They've left." "Thank you." She hesitated. For what it's worth, he was completely out of line. "I know," I said, and I meant it. "Let me know if he comes back. I'll call security." "They won't," I replied. I wasn't sure why I was so certain, but I was. They didn't come back. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Emails answered. A meeting I barely remembered attending. Red lines completed almost automatically. Muscle memory taking over when my mind refused to cooperate. When 5 o'clock came, I packed up slowly, deliberately. No rush, no dramatic exit. Outside, the air had softened. The city looked the same as it always did, unbothered, indifferent. I walked to my car and sat for a moment before turning the key, letting the quiet settle again. That night, my apartment felt different. Not emptier, just mine. I cooked something simple, ate at the counter instead of the couch, and resisted the instinct to check my phone every few minutes. Marcus was blocked. His friends hadn't tried again. The silence felt earned. Midweek, a message came through from Logan, one of the few people I'd always felt comfortable around in his circle. "Hey, I heard what happened. Just wanted to check in. You okay?" I stared at the screen longer than necessary before replying. "Yeah, I'm okay." The typing bubble appeared almost immediately. For what it's worth, a lot of us thought what he said was messed up. We just didn't know what to do in the moment. I exhaled slowly. "It's fine," I typed. "Really." "It's not," he replied. And honestly, this wasn't new. He's been weird about you for a while, like he wanted to be with you, but also wanted everyone to know he could do better. It was uncomfortable to watch. That one landed differently. Not because it shocked me, but because it named something I'd been circling for months without fully admitting. The constant feeling of auditioning, of proving I deserved to stay. Thanks for telling me, I wrote back. I appreciate it. After that, the days settled into a quieter rhythm. Work, gym, home. I started sketching again in the evenings. Nothing for clients, nothing that had to be justified. Just lines, shapes, buildings that didn't need permission to exist. My appetite came back. My sleep deepened. I noticed how much tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders, how it slowly began to release. 2 weeks after the dinner, I was at a coffee shop near my apartment when I saw his brother, Tyler. He was ahead of me in line. When he turned with his drink, our eyes met. He froze for a beat, then walked over. "Lydia," he said, "do you have a minute?" I nodded toward a table by the window. He sat down, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm not here to defend him," he said quickly. What he said was screwed up. We got into a huge fight about it that night. "Okay," I said carefully. "He's not doing great," Tyler added. "But that's not why I'm here. I just wanted you to know you weren't wrong about any of it." I studied his face. He looked tired, honest. "Thank you," I said, and I meant that too. When he left, I sat there a while longer, watching people pass outside the window. Couples, families, dogs pulling at leashes, life moving forward without waiting for anyone to catch up. I didn't feel triumphant, just clear. And for the first time since that night, I knew for certain I'd made the only choice that would have let me keep myself intact. The strange thing about clarity is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in pieces. Quiet confirmations. Small moments that stack until the picture can't be ignored anymore. The week after Marcus showed up at my office passed without incident. No calls from unknown numbers. No surprise messages slipping through blocked lists. No dramatic apologies delivered through intermediaries. Just silence. At first, I mistook it for peace. Then I realized it was something else entirely. People knew. I didn't notice it right away. It was subtle. The way conversations paused half a beat when I walked into a room at work events. The way certain mutual acquaintances looked relieved when they saw me, like they'd been hoping I wouldn't disappear entirely. On Wednesday evening, after a long day of revisions and a client call that ran late, I stopped by the gym near my office. Nothing intense, just enough movement to remind my body that it was still mine. As I was wiping down a machine, someone said my name. I turned to see Evan, a friend of a friend I'd met a handful of times through Marcus. We'd never been close, but he'd always been polite in that reserved way, observant, careful with his words. "Hey," he said, "you doing okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, I am." He hesitated, then glanced around the room like he was checking for witnesses. "I hope this isn't weird, but I'm glad you walked out." I blinked. "You were there?" "Yeah," he said. "Table was a mess after, not the fun kind." He shook his head. "What he said wasn't funny. It was cruel. A lot of people felt that way. We just didn't say it out loud at the time." I let that sit. "I should have said something," he added. "We all should have." "You don't owe me anything," I said, and I meant it. He smiled, relieved, then left me to my workout. But his words stayed with me longer than the sweat cooling on my skin. That night, I scrolled through my messages. Old ones this time. Conversations I'd archived, moments I'd dismissed, jokes that landed just a little wrong, compliments that came with qualifiers, apologies I'd accepted without question. Patterns are obvious once you stop explaining them away. On Friday, an email came through from a professional contact inviting me to a small industry mixer the following week. I almost declined out of habit, out of that old instinct to shrink my calendar, to stay manageable. Then I accepted. The mixer was held in a converted warehouse space downtown. Exposed beams, long communal tables, people balancing drinks and business cards, trying to look relaxed while calculating everything. I was halfway through a conversation about adaptive reuse when someone touched my elbow lightly. "Lydia?" I turned to see Mark, another mutual acquaintance from Marcus's circle. Someone I'd always felt faintly uneasy around without knowing why. "I just wanted to say," he began, lowering his voice, "I'm sorry about what happened." I studied his face, searching for an angle. There wasn't one. "I didn't know how bad it was," he continued. "But after the dinner, things started making sense. The jokes, the way he talked about you when you weren't around." My stomach tightened. "How did he talk about me?" Mark grimaced. "Like you were provisional. Like he was waiting to see if something better came along." There it was, out in the open, unsoftened. "I didn't realize how much that affected you until you left," he said. "You leaving forced people to look at it." I thanked him and excused myself, stepping outside into the cool night air. I leaned against the brick wall and closed my eyes. It hurt, but it also confirmed something important. I hadn't imagined the imbalance. I hadn't been too sensitive. I hadn't failed some invisible test. I'd simply outgrown a situation that was built to keep me small. The following Sunday, I met my sister for brunch. We sat by the window of a quiet cafe, sunlight cutting across the table in clean lines. "You look different," she said, studying me over her coffee. "Different how?" "Lighter," she replied, "like you're not bracing for something." I smiled. I stopped waiting for permission. She nodded, understanding more than I'd said. Later that afternoon, while I was reorganizing a shelf in my living room, I found the gift receipt for the compass I'd bought Marcus. I stared at it for a long moment, then folded it neatly and dropped it into the trash. I didn't need the symbol anymore. By the end of the week, the story had settled into something solid in my mind. Not a dramatic betrayal, not a cautionary tale for others. Just a moment of truth delivered publicly, and a decision made privately. People will tell you who they are, eventually. Sometimes they do it with a smile and a room full of laughter. What matters is what you do once you hear them clearly. I didn't expect to hear from anyone in Marcus's family again. That chapter felt closed, sealed with silence and distance, the clean kind of ending that doesn't invite sequels. So when my phone buzzed late one Tuesday afternoon with an unfamiliar number, I almost let it go to voicemail. "Almost." "Lydia," a man's voice said when I answered. Careful, measured. "This is Richard, Marcus's uncle." I felt my shoulders tense instinctively. "I won't take much of your time," he continued. "I just thought, you deserve to hear a few things. And Marcus won't say them himself." There it was, the admission before the admission. We met the next day at a quiet cafe near his office. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. "I didn't understand what happened that night," he said after we sat down. "I thought you two had a small argument, that emotions ran high. I even thought maybe alcohol played a role." "And then?" I asked. "And then Marcus finally repeated what he said," Richard replied, word for word. He paused, jaw tightening. I was furious. I said nothing. I didn't need to. "He tried to minimize it," Richard went on. "Called it humor, sarcasm, claimed everyone laughed." "They did," I said quietly. "Yes," he nodded. "And that's the part I regret most, not stopping it." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "Marcus has always been insecure. He hides it by making himself the center of the room, by putting other people just slightly beneath him." I thought of all those jokes, all those moments I'd brushed off. "We let him get away with it," Richard said, "because it was easier than confronting it." I took a sip of my coffee, letting the bitterness ground me. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you walked away," he said simply, and it forced a reckoning. Marcus's name had come up more than once in family conversations since the dinner, not in anger at me, but in concern about him, about patterns no one wanted to name before. "He didn't expect consequences," Richard admitted. "He thought you'd cool off, that you'd come back." I met his eyes. He was wrong. "Yes," he said, "he was." We sat in silence for a moment, not uncomfortable, just final. "I won't contact you again," Richard said as he stood. "But I wanted you to know you weren't wrong and you weren't unreasonable." After he left, I stayed at the table longer than necessary, watching the door swing closed behind him. That conversation didn't bring closure, but it did bring confirmation. Later that week, Marcus's brother Tyler texted me once more. "He's moving," the message read. "Job transfer. Different city. I think he needs a reset." I stared at the screen, then typed back. "I hope he figures things out." And I meant it, in the distant, detached way you wish growth for someone you no longer need to witness. That night, I stood at my drafting table and looked at a set of sketches I'd been avoiding. Bold lines, unapologetic angles, a design I would have second-guessed months earlier. I didn't hesitate now. I inked it in. Sometimes people don't break all at once. Sometimes they fracture quietly, behind closed doors, in conversations you never hear. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is leave before the cracks become your responsibility. The shift didn't announce itself. There was no single morning where I woke up feeling transformed, no cinematic moment where everything suddenly made sense. Instead, it crept in through ordinary days, rearranging things quietly while I wasn't looking. I noticed it first at work. I spoke up more in meetings. Not louder, just clearer. When something didn't work, I said so. When an idea deserved space, I didn't apologize for taking it. The mixed-use proposal I'd been revising finally went out on Friday. Clean, confident, uncompromised. I'd stopped second-guessing the bolder elements, the cantilevered terrace, the unconventional circulation flow. They stayed. So did I. My evenings changed too. I stopped filling them with noise. No more mindless scrolling or background television meant to drown out my own thoughts. I sketched, cooked meals that took longer than 15 minutes, went to bed when I was tired instead of when I felt done. I rejoined a yoga studio near my apartment, one I'd quit months earlier because Marcus had joked. It was very on brand for me in a way that made it sound small. The first night back, I held a plank longer than I thought I could. My arms shook. I didn't drop. It felt symbolic. Friends noticed before I did. At a small dinner with coworkers, someone raised a glass and said, "You seem settled." I smiled. I stopped negotiating with discomfort. At the gym, Evan caught my eye across the weight room and gave me a small nod. No commentary, just recognition. It was enough. One evening, as I was locking up the office, my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. I stared at it for a moment, then let it ring out. There was no message left. I didn't wonder who it was. The following weekend, I went to an open house alone. Not because I was buying, just because I wanted to walk through a space without imagining how someone else might inhabit it. Sunlight poured across unfinished floors. I stood in the center of the room and turned slowly, mapping out possibilities that belonged only to me. For the first time in a long while, my future felt spacious. I didn't rush to fill it. By midweek, the proposal results came in. We won. I read the email twice, then once more, just to be sure. The client specifically mentioned the boldness of the design, the confidence behind it. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. Not because of the win, but because I recognized myself in it. That night, I met my sister for a walk along the river. The air was crisp, the water dark and steady beside us. "You don't talk about him anymore," she observed. "I don't need to," I said. She bumped my shoulder lightly. "Good." As we walked, I realized something else had changed. I wasn't waiting. Not for an apology, not for closure, not for him to understand what he'd done. I already had everything I needed. The shift wasn't dramatic. It was durable. And it was mine. What surprised me wasn't how quickly people stopped asking about Marcus. It was how little space his name occupied once it wasn't being forced into the conversation. At a holiday mixer a week later, his absence went mostly unnoticed. Conversations flowed around work, plans, renovations, travel. If someone mentioned him, it was in passing, like a footnote that no longer needed explaining. I stood near the bar, discussing zoning restrictions and project timelines, and realized something quietly important. No one was looking at me with pity anymore. No one was waiting for a reaction. Life had rebalanced itself. Later that evening, Logan found me near the coat check. "You good?" he asked, casual. No lowered voice, no careful phrasing. "Yeah," I said, "I really am." He nodded, accepting that without trying to add anything to it. That was new. People had stopped feeling like they needed to update me, warn me, or fill the silence with commentary. I liked it. The days after that felt open in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. I lingered in places I used to rush through. A bookstore on my walk home, a small cafe I'd always told myself I didn't have time for. I bought things without mentally checking whether someone else would approve. Rearranged my living room on a whim. Hung artwork Marcus had once called a lot. The space felt better immediately. On Sunday morning, I ran into his sister at the farmer's market. The interaction was brief and uncomplicated. "I'm sorry," she said. No qualifiers, no excuses. "Thank you," I replied. We didn't stand there revisiting anything. We didn't pretend to be friends. We acknowledged the past and let it stay where it belonged. As I walked away, carrying bread still warm from the oven and flowers I didn't have a reason for, I noticed how light my hands felt. I hadn't won anything. I hadn't exposed him, corrected the record, or demanded accountability. I'd simply stopped participating. And that, I realized, was the cleanest ending I could have given myself. Some people mistake silence for weakness. But sometimes, silence is what happens after you've said everything that matters. The last time I thought about that night, really thought about it, without flinching or rushing past the memory, was weeks later, in the middle of a design meeting. A client was asking for something safe, predictable, something that wouldn't raise eyebrows or invite questions. I listened, nodded, took notes. Then I surprised myself. "I think we're underestimating the space," I said calmly. "If we treat it like something temporary, it'll always feel unfinished. But if we design it like it's meant to last, everything else falls into place." The room went quiet. Not uncomfortable, attentive. I walked them through the idea. Bolder lines, cleaner transitions, a layout that assumed confidence instead of asking permission for it. As I spoke, I realized I wasn't just selling a design. I was naming a shift. After the meeting, I sat alone at my desk, looking out at the city. Glass and concrete and steel, all the things people think are permanent until they're not. I thought about Marcus then, not with anger, not with regret, but with distance. I understood something I hadn't before. When he'd called me temporary, he wasn't describing me. He was revealing himself. Some people only know how to feel secure if they're standing on someone else's shoulders. They make others provisional, so they never have to commit to seeing them as real. I'd spent 8 months making myself smaller, softer, easier to hold without effort. And the moment he said the quiet part out loud, when he turned his contempt into a performance, it gave me clarity instead of shame. People ask me now, when the story comes up in pieces, whether I regret how I handled it, whether I wish I'd stayed and confronted him in front of everyone, made him explain, made him apologize. I don't. Walking out was the cleanest line I could draw. It said everything without cruelty, without spectacle, without turning me into something I wasn't. I didn't need him to admit fault. I needed to stop accepting it. Later that week, I went back to my drafting table and finished a concept I'd been circling for months. It was unconventional, confident, a little intimidating, and it felt exactly right. That was when it finally settled, not as a lesson, not as closure, but as truth. I was never temporary. I was just in a place that couldn't hold me.